Pinball seems to be enjoying a bit of a resurgence in popularity at the moment, and it seems to be across generations too. Parents who remember it from the 70s and 80s have introduced it to their kids. It has had a checkered history. And can you outline the development of the pinball culture for us?
It started with French bagatelle machines. Well, even machines are just tabletop games that you plunge a small ball and it would bounce around a playfield with holes and pins literally nailed into the playfield, and depending on how you nudge the table it would bounce from one pin to the other and end up in a hole, and then you count up the score on those holes and that's your game. And so that grew into something that was a full-size machine, still with no flippers, but the idea was you would plunge the ball and depending on which hole it eventually bounced into, you may be able to score some coins. It might spit out coins, or it might score replays, and so this turned into a game that was very much based on chance because you really had very little control over it. But if it was handing out money or things of value, then that was frowned upon by a lot of the authorities in the States, and so they considered a gambling machine, and these early pinball machines were actually banned in a lot of states. But over time, there were the addition of flippers actuated by buttons on the side of the game, and that fundamentally changed it from being a game really based on chance to a game based on skill. And that was what led the courts to revise their decision after it was demonstrated that yes, you can predict what the ball is going to do by skillfully flipping and aiming it with intent. And so it was no longer illegal in a bunch of states, and in New York in particular, and then it kind of grew in the 70s and 80s and early 90s. It was hugely popular, but it went through a lull in the late 90s as video games kind of took over, and early 2000s it was there are very few manufacturers still around. But since the sort of the 2010s and so around then, we've seen a significant increase in interest in the manufacturing of new games. There's been several new companies who have come online in the last decade, and there's probably about half a dozen or more manufacturers making new games now, whereas for a while there's only really just one. And the technology going into the games is keeping up to date with the modern video games, and so we're seeing a real combination of computer gaming plus real physical pinball still. So you're still dealing with a real physical steel ball rolling around on the playfield and hitting targets, but we're getting all the other benefits of computers with high resolution video and audio and deep rule sets and gameplay now. So it's become a much more engaging and rewarding gameplay now than we used to have. The games used to be very, very basic and simple and just a case of scoring a bunch of points by doing one or two things repeatedly. These days you're essentially playing out a story in the game a lot of the time, or you're recreating an on-stage rock concert experience with live songs and live video, and so it's a very, very different interactive experience to what we had back in the 80s and 90s. And I think for that reason it's seen a lot of new interest from younger players, and the older generation are quite impressed to see what's become of their old hobby.
Great. It's now time for a blatant ad break. In the Wellington City Library's collection, you'll find this recent edition, thank you Hamish, Pinball, A Graphic History of the Silver Ball by John Chad. It outlines the history of pinball, particularly in the USA, along with tips on how to play. What are your thoughts on this book, Hamish?
I love it to bits. I have been a fan of John's for several years. He and a friend of his, Alex, did a pinball zine back in the day, and that was, if you know, a zine is like a very basic, very small magazine that they issued, I think maybe 5 or 6 issues of, and then I later bought the compendium as a bound volume. Unfortunately those are no longer available to buy, but I do have them at the shop for people to read. And yeah, since then John has gone on to do some other cool stuff, including this graphic history book, and have on order several copies of this, so soon we'll be able to buy it at the Pinball Shop, but for the time being it's at the local library, so we're very, very lucky to have it there. That's one of the few copies around at the moment. So yeah, I think it's an excellent introduction, and the art style is really clever, the way he's able to bring across a lot of concepts that are kind of difficult to describe, because you're trying to describe things that are very specific to small parts of a playfield, but he's able to engage the whole page and kind of bring that emotion to light and really allow people to understand it at a deeper level. So yeah, I think he's done a fantastic job with it.
I certainly learned a lot from it, and I know absolutely nothing about pinball except they used to be in fish and chip shops
Yes.
back in the day. So it was amazing the technical detail he went into. So it's there, it's available at Wellington City Library's collection. But tell us a bit more about your machines. Where do they come from, and how often are you installing or changing the games in the shop?
Yeah, so like I said, about half the games are mine. They tend to be a lot of the newer games. I'm buying some new games from Multimorphic and Stern and Jersey Jack and a few others. And the other games belong to my friend Simon, who has been restoring games for about 30 years or so. And he's always been operating games in fish and chip shops and bars and cafes around town. So if you've been playing pinball out and about in Wellington, chances are you've probably played one of Simon's games. But he's really put some of his nicest games into the shop, and he's been rotating those out as he has other orders or leases for games with other clients. So yeah, we're changing games out probably every couple of weeks at least. We'll be changing a game, and over time I'll be buying more and more new games, really to show off what the new technology is and the new games that you can buy new in box, in the hope of selling a few more games new in box. And as those games are no longer available to buy from distributors, then over time I'd probably be looking at putting those out into locations myself. But yeah, the games, a lot of them come from the second-hand market within New Zealand, and there's active Facebook groups and trade me groups who are buying and selling used games and hopefully restoring them at various stages along the way. And the other big part is new games, but the problem with buying new pinball machines is that there's such a great demand for them at the moment that often you'd be looking at a 3 to even 12-month wait just to get your game manufactured, let alone shipped from the other side of the world sometimes. So there's a long wait period involved with new games, whereas on the second-hand market you can often get satisfaction pretty quickly, just a case of hunting around looking for that good deal.
You're an agent for Multimorphic machines. What's special about them?
The modular design of their platform. So every other pinball manufacturer, when they come out with a new game, it's a single title, they have a wooden playfield, they drill holes in it and print art on it, and that's that one game. Multimorphic have taken a different approach. They've made the very topmost part of their playfield modular, so it can literally just lift straight out of the game, just unplug a couple of cables and lift it out. Then you can just position in a different playfield that has different ramps and different toys and different things to do. And so that modular design is combined with the lower part of the playfield, which is a computer screen still with physical balls rolling over it. So instead of a wooden screen, it's a computer screen. We can have any graphics we like on it, and the system will actually track the movement of the ball over that screen as well. So you can have virtual targets appearing on the screen, as well as real physical targets on the playfield just above that, and physical targets down the side as well. So it's kind of combining the best of real traditional pinball as well as modern computer gaming. But that modular design saves a lot of space. You only need to physically house one large machine in your home, and you could have a whole collection of games just in smaller cardboard boxes in the garage. And it's also something that you can get into and program and build yourself if you wanted to. And so if there's a young maker in the family, they can actually start tinkering away and build their own ramps and toys and pop bumpers and create their own pinball game. as well as programming the interactive part of it. They can either take an existing playfield and reprogram it to write their own game for it, or they can start from scratch and build their own software and hardware. And so I'm hoping to appeal to the Wellingtonians who don't have a large house and have enough space to have a collection of games, but there's enough room for one machine and a few boxes in the garage, and also those people who have an idea of a game that they want to see, and now there's the opportunity for them to actually create that game themselves and turn that dream into reality.
Do you have a favourite amongst your games, or is that like asking a parent about their children?
I do, yes. At the moment, my favourite is Godzilla. It's the premium Godzilla from Stern. Keith Alwyn is the designer of that game, and he's one of the top players in the world. And the design really reflects that. It's incredibly engaging from a visual and audio aspect. It's got these great sound and video clips from these cheesy old black and white Japanese Godzilla movies, but with a modern narrator over the top. And the flow of the game just feels so good. If you're shooting the ball, it's going to go up ramps and travel down different pathways on its way back to you each time, and you can never quite always predict what it's going to do because there's so many things that are moving and changing around in it. But even if you don't make the shot and you think, oh, it's going to bounce somewhere else, it actually ends up going somewhere and doing something cool anyway. So they've really thought about what happens to the ball as you make each shot, the flow and the feel of that, and how well it returns to the flippers. And so in that element, the design of the game is fantastic, but also the rule set is deep and engaging and interesting. You're telling the story of these aliens invading Earth, and Godzilla is essentially there to save us all. And it's also a great tournament game, and so it's very balanced. You can play multiplayer, and if the players are of similar sort of skill set, it's going to be a very tight and exciting game. So it's brilliant from the tournament side of things. I think the IP is cool, and the movie clips are cheesy and fun, and really the flow of the game and the way it feels is fantastic. So yeah, Godzilla's definitely my favourite.
I noted when we visited the other day that Guns N' Roses is currently closest to the door. Do you expect to see a spike in interest in that when the band play later in the year?
Yes, indeed. In fact, I'll possibly even try and get the game into the green room. Who knows, I might get a sign. But yeah, Slash is actually a co-designer on that game. So Slash is a pinhead, and he designed this game several years ago, and then approached Jersey Jack Pinball to manufacture it. And when it came out, it won all of the awards that year in terms of the pinball design. And what they've essentially done is recreated their current tour as a world under glass. And so you're essentially playing the band members, playing through the songs. You can see the stage layout and the lighting and video effects and things that are all recreated inside this game. So yeah, I think there will be certainly a renewed interest as we get later in the year. But that spot will be used for other games soon as well. We've got a new title coming up for the Multimorphic P3, which is Weird Al Yankovic. And so pretty soon that'll be in pride of place there as well.
How many games, do they have a run when they make these machines and games? So are they in tens, are they in hundreds or thousands around the world? How rare do they become?
The bigger manufacturers like Stern and Jersey Jack, their games would be in the thousands. And Stern in particular, they do typically 3, maybe 4 major titles a year, and they do Pro and Premium and maybe some limited edition versions of those. And so yeah, they're producing probably in the thousands per year. Smaller manufacturers, Spooky Pinball, Haggis, and Multimorphic, well actually not so much Multimorphic, they're growing very quickly now, but other manufacturers, yeah, they're doing probably in the 500 or so might be a typical run for some of these more boutique games. But a lot of it depends on the license that they have. If it is a licensed title, then they would have only a limited window to manufacture those games, and so they try and get as many sales in that time period as they can. Whereas if it's their own IP, then they can continue to produce that game over many, many years, and so you often see that those titles over time might get up into the thousands. But yeah, a lot of it depends on the business case, whether it's a licensed title or whether it's their own own IP that often dictates the size of the run that they can do.
Okay. Tell us a bit more about pinball, the international competitive sport, and New Zealand's participation in it rather than pinball as a game in an arcade.
Yeah, so it's more fun to compete. The old adage is true. The competitive side of things has certainly taken off overseas, and we've seen some very large pinball expos and conferences that incorporate tournaments, and often those tournaments might sell several hundred places. They'll sell out within seconds as they go live on their website. So there's high demand for these big tournaments, and people will travel from all over the world to some of these places. We don't have anything quite of that scale in New Zealand yet, although in our neighbours in Australia, they've just finished up the Brisbane Masters, and that's an annual, I think, a 10-day tournament series that attracts some of the best players in the world. And we could very likely piggyback off that as well, to get some of the other players who are down in this area, then get them to pop over to New Zealand. But the tournament side has really taken off since the IFPA, the International Flipper Pinball Association, has started ranking players worldwide. And they have a system whereby once you've been playing a few competitive tournaments and have gone places in those, then you'll start to accumulate points based on the skill level of the other players and the size of the tournaments that you're competing in. And over time you'll build up these points and you'll be ranked with other players around the world. And so we have some of the top players in the world in New Zealand, in particular the world's top woman players for several years running, a young girl in Pukekohe. And there's some of the top, probably top 500 players in the country, several of whom are in Wellington, a few in Christchurch and a couple of Auckland, but we're lucky to have some very high-end competitive players here. But my hope is to introduce that competitive excitement to other players and get them to start chasing those pinball whopper points. It is something slightly addictive about attending these tournaments and seeing your ranking creep up each time you do that. So I think it's a great way to get people to be more engaged with improvements and see their rankings increase and get that positive feedback.
If you were to host one of these tournaments, even at a small level, what kind of numbers would you be thinking of attracting to Wellington?
With our current setup, with the space that we have between the games and the comfort level that we've got in the arcade, we have a practical limit of probably about 40 or 50 participants at a time. Whereas these larger tournaments, we'd be hoping to get at least 100 or maybe a couple of hundred entrants to a decent sized national or international tournament. And so I think if we were to do that sort of thing, we could look at possibly engaging the Fork and Brew or the Bond Bar next door and hosting some of the games up there, and also incorporating our live video and screens with their screens upstairs, so that people upstairs can keep track of what's happening downstairs and vice versa, and spread the games and the tournament out over more than just one venue. So I think in terms of practicality for large competitions, if we were to host it at the Old Pinball Shop, then we'd be best to get the help of our neighbours. But there are other venues around town as well that are probably better suited to hosting a large tournament. The Lanes Bowling just down on Wakefield Street, they've got a growing collection of pinball and a nice sized space for it. And there's also a large collection at Boneface Brewery in Upper Hutt at the Brewtown up there. And there's been several big tournaments that have gone very well up there as well. So yeah, we do have the facilities to host large tournaments, and for a large international like that, yeah, I think we could look at doing that. We'd bring in a bunch of other machines from personal collections and borrow them from all over the country, bring them to Wellington and set up hopefully 50 or more games, and be able to host a couple of hundred entrants in a tournament that might run for 2 or 3 days over a long weekend.
Yeah, so these are multi-days, these are people who are going to require accommodation, they're definitely going to be eating and drinking locally, so it's a big business that you can, in future, be bringing into the CBD area.
Yeah, and there'll be partners or family members, particularly if we're inviting or attracting people from overseas, then I'm sure a lot of family members who aren't into pinball themselves, they're not going to turn down the opportunity to come to New Zealand for a holiday. So if we can get the pinhead in the family down here, then maybe the rest of the family will follow as well.
A tentatively related question, but recently I did a blog piece looking at the benefits or not of bringing dogs to work, and you bring your greyhound Leia into the shop at weekends. Yeah. How do the customers react to that?
They love her, and she loves them as well. So Leia gets on really well with people. She doesn't mind the noise, and people just always happy to see a friendly greyhound curled up on the couch waiting to be patted. And it works really well because quite often there'll be one person who's engaged with pinball and playing for quite a while, and if the other person or other members of the family get a bit bored, they can just sit down and pat Leia, and she will always be accepting pats, so she's a good distraction.
Oh, that's great. A little over 6 months into opening a new business, what advice do you have for someone considering whether to follow your path and turn a passion into an income generating business?
The passion is the key word there. If you're passionate about it, then chances are somebody else, there's a target market out there who is also passionate about that thing as well. And so I think it may be an idea to consider starting with that minimum viable product. What is the least that we can practically do to attract that passionate market to begin with? But keep in mind, there's also going to be a market who may have a passing interest in what you're doing, and those are the people who can become passionate. So that's your growth market, but your starting target market is those people who share your passion. That's where that value for value model can come in. That's where you can rely on them to take it easy on you as you're starting out and starting small, starting with that minimum viable product, just adding to it as you're able to over time, and then increasing your reach to attract those other people who don't yet share your passion but have the potential to do so.
And final question, are you taking Christmas work function bookings yet?
We are taking bookings, yes. There's still plenty of space around the Christmas period. So we do charge just by the hour, and we give you exclusive use of the arcade. All the games are on free play, and it's becoming a very popular option for corporate social clubs as well as private parties and birthday parties and that. So there's definitely openings.
Hamish, thank you for your time, and Wellington, you know what to do for the Christmas function.
Play more pinball.